So you're thinking about capitalism in terms of what Marx would call the relations of production. Do you have lords and serfs? Do you have slaves and slave owners? Do you have business owners and employees? And once you've before we get into your ideas about what could replace capitalism, in chapter 3 of the book, you go through a series of basic objections to capitalism. You say, for example, that it's undemocratic, that it's unequal, and that it's unstable. And I suspect that most people likely to watch this, are broadly on board with all of that. But at the same time, I think something that we're certainly interested in trying to do on the show, and I think you're interested in trying to do in the in the book, is to arm people who might be sympathetic to that kind of critique with like a way of making the case to people they interact with, who aren't, right? So like how do you go about making that argument?
Yeah, here's the way I do it. I'm going to pick, I'll pick any of them if you want, but I would start with the anti or the undemocratic.
Mm-hmm.
Here's the way I do it. I say to them, look, I'm going to accept, for the sake of argument, that having people vote, every so often, for the mayor of the town, for the governor of the state, for the president, all of that, that's what we mean by democracy. I say to people, I would argue against that if I could, but I'm not going to do that now. I'm going to give you that because it is significant that you can vote. I'm deeply respectful of the right to vote. Human beings fought for centuries to get that. Universal suffrage, for me, very important achievement of the mass of people, should never be given up. I got that. There we are in agreement. I said, but now, if you like that, if you believe in democracy, if when you read the story that once upon a time we all had kings and queens and emperors and czars and all of that, people who literally sat at the top of society, could deprive people of property, of their lives, of their families, and all of that, and that we got rid of those kings, either by the guillotine or a less ugly means, et cetera, and you're not pining for them. You don't want that back. You don't see that as a loss you want to reverse. Okay, then we're on the same page. That means you believe that the people affected by a decision should have some way to shape that decision, that they have the right to participate in making the decisions that affect their lives. And when I was a young person, the most vibrant organization on my campus was SDS, Students for a Democratic Society, and they hammered at that point so that it became the common language of people, including those who hated SDS. If you're affected by a decision, you have the right to participate in making it. And a vote does that, gives you some participation in who the mayor is and what he's going to do, or who the governor is and what she's going to do, and so on. We're all clear. We have that in our mind. Now I come and I hit them with the point. I said, when you go to work, you cross the threshold. You leave the public street and you cross the threshold into the office, into the factory, into the store, the enterprise, if you like. And suddenly, democracy is out the window. It's gone. You don't vote for who the CEO is. You barely know the CEO's name, but the CEO can fire you. The CEO can talk about having an impact on your life. Your job is gone. Your income is gone. Your family is suddenly thrown into all the tension and stress that implies. You have no power over that person at all. he's elected or she's elected, but not by you. He or she, as CEO, makes lots of decisions that affect your life, including whether you keep the job or not, whether to hire you, fire you, make unbearable noise, make you work longer hours, change your pay, change your work schedule. 100 ways you are impacted, and you have no say at all. Nothing. You are basically told by the supervisor, the foreman, or whoever you have over you, you got two choices. You want your job, you do this. You don't do this, you don't have a job. Your choice, freedom of choice, you can leave. But of course, if you leave, you know what's going to happen? You're going to look for another job. And you know what you're going to find at that other job? Pretty much the same conditions that you had at this job, as far as what I've just said. So there is no democracy in the workplace. In the capitalist workplace, we haven't organized it. We could, but we didn't. And from day one, say here in the United States, from the days of the 1774 and our revolution, or however you want to do it, we established voting, we established a certain political democracy, but we've never dreamed of sticking it inside the workplace. And then I look at whoever I'm talking to, and I say, come on, Jack or Mary, you're an adult. You spend the best hours of your life in the workplace. 5 out of 7 days, you get up in the morning, you brush your teeth, you get all ready, you go to your job. That's where you spend your 8 hours that you've been building up to. And then you go home to recoup so you can do it again. So if democracy is a principle you believe in, then you've got a real problem, because capitalism deprives you of that democracy in the workplace. And then if I have their ear, I tell them it's even worse. Because if 5 out of 7 days in every job, the employee has a tactile experience of no democracy, are you going to stimulate that man, that woman, that person to be eager and have an appetite for democracy back in the residential neighborhood where they live? No. You are creating a habit to not do that. You're creating the habit of accepting that the CEO at the job is replicated by the CEO in City Hall or the CEO at the legislative office. You may know who they are. You may see them in the newspaper more often because they're bigger figures, but you're alienated from them. In other words, you weaken the political democracy by foreclosing on having an economic democracy go with it. You know, I got to tell you, Ben, and it's not because I'm particularly persuasive. That is a powerful argument. You give me a half an hour to an hour with reasonable people who may not agree with me on a good number of things. But on that one, they may not have agreed with me at the beginning, but they're going to think a lot more about this than they did before. And that's why I use it. I learned this from other people. I saw what that argument was able to do. It's a very, very powerful argument. And not just in the university, in the factory, on the shop floor, at the bar, wherever you might be, when these issues come up, as they do, and as they do now more than I ever have in my lifetime. I got to tell you, since I got, white hair, I'm older than you. People like me, and me included, have tried for a long time to figure out how to make progress with our ideas, how to get more people to agree, which is our job. I always thought of that as part of my job. And I got to tell you, the last 10 years have been unlike anything that went before. I was very active as a college student in the 1960s. The war in Vietnam really changed me around in many ways. But I've never seen, I did not expect to live long enough to see what I see now. I understand what's scary in the environment. I do. We all do. You'd have to be dead not to see it. But what's not getting the attention, and maybe that's a good thing, is the fact that there is a building wave. In my more ebullient moments, I might even say a tsunami of people on the left in this country, even if they don't think of themselves that way, who are realizing that this system is in trouble. This system is not what we expected. Even in the MAGA movement, the very choice, make it great again, is a recognition, however dim, that it's not there anymore. And yeah, they have their story to tell about that. It's not our story, but we do have the same trajectory in our heads. And I think you're going to see in this country, based on my lifetime here. I was born, by the way, in Youngstown, Ohio. I come from the middle of the country. That my parents were immigrants from Europe. That's so it's different. But on the other hand, my father was pushing a wheelbarrow in Youngstown, Ohio when I was born. Youngstown Sheet and Tube Company. It was where he worked. That's the job he could get as a refugee. It was an unskilled labor's job. But I've never seen this country as open as now to the kinds of things I'm saying. And that, too, was a major stimulus to write such a book.
Yeah, I think this is something you and I have talked about before. I think it might have been before or after I was on air when I was on your show a few years ago in New York. But my mother grew up in Youngstown, so I grew up. Yeah. Back in the era when the steel mills were belching out so much all the time that people. My grandmother worked as a nurse in public hospital in Youngstown. And, I remember her saying once that like they were shocked when they would see somebody with like pink lungs, because it was so, it was like just being there was like, smoking packs a day. And, by the time, I was growing up, of course, that was in the past, but I grew up visiting Youngstown, and not that many years ago, me and my ex-wife used to stop through Youngstown pretty regularly to visit a relative who was still there. And like, I have to say, in terms of your point about MAGA, this is, Youngstown as it is now is just, and really since I've been visiting there, I mean, I can remember like my grandfather when I was visiting Youngstown, seeing him drive at night and like every, like red lights were like yield signs, right? Like the crime rate is such that, you didn't want to linger, at red lights at night. And like, it's just such a dramatic, like that, everything about that city now, I mean, is such a dramatic illustration of that thing about what I, optimistically would still like to call late capitalism, that is, that leads people to nod along to sentences like "Make America Great Again," right? Yeah. As in, like right now, things are not, things are not what they should be, right? Because it's so the sort of face of deindustrialization in a place like Youngstown, even now, right? So long after most of the steel mills closed, is just such a grim illustration of what this society, what this way of organizing a society can do, and of course it goes to your point just now about the undemocratic heading of the third chapter of your book, and of course also the second one, the unequal part, because those decisions, right, to take in many cases profitable steel mills and relocate them somewhere else where you can make even higher profits, are things that impact vast numbers of people's lives, and dramatically, like, can destroy vast numbers of people's lives. But of course, most of the people whose lives are impacted by something like that, have no input on it whatsoever.
That's right. Look, I use the example because, being an economist, I study these numbers, I'm familiar. But you take Detroit. In the 1970s, Detroit was the place that presidents of the United States took foreign visitors. Some president of some other country visits Washington, they have their meetings and all that, but they take an airplane, they go to Detroit, and the president, whoever that president happened to be, and it was true for Republicans, Democrats, didn't matter, showing them this metropolis, 2 million people in 1970 in Detroit, making it one of the 10 biggest cities in the country. And there were the Ford and GM and Chrysler and all of the workers. And then you could even say, look, this is happy capitalism. The workers are happy. Look at their faces. And these were UAW workers, at that time the most powerful union in the United States, that under the left-wing Ruther brothers had become a very powerful union, able to deliver extraordinary wages and benefits to workers. So exceptional that even after the great migration of large numbers of African Americans from the American South went to Detroit, hoping to get jobs in the auto industry, were able to get a significant number of them, so that this president could even show black and white working together, living pretty near each other. The black workers had their homes and their cars in the driveway and the whole bit. It was a celebration of a successful capitalism. 2 million people. Today in Detroit, a third of the city is abandoned. It's just, I've been there. It's empty houses, one after another, street after street. The population of Detroit, by its own count, 700,000 people. That means 1,300,000 of them left Detroit, gone. The family leaving behind that abandoned house that you can now see. Going where? Well, many of them went to Cleveland or to Wilmington, Delaware, where it all happened again to them. I mean, it's beyond belief. And the decisions made by a handful of super rich people, the board of directors of GM, the board of directors of Ford, deciding that the automobile business would be more profitable in Mexico, in Canada, in China. GM now sells more cars in China than it does in the United States. It depends on China more than the United States, which is changing global politics even as we speak. All of this is a consequence of how capitalism works. And if you think this has to do with democracy, well, then either you never thought about it, or your definition of democracy is one that would be straining for anyone else to go along with. And the inequality, by the way, is a footnote to all of this. You can't keep doing the last 40 years, American corporations, big ones, most of them, established business in China. Other countries too, but I'm going to use China as a basic example. And they went over there, and the documentation for this is infinitely large. They went over there for two reasons, which they will tell you. And if you read the financial literature, which I do, the Financial Times, the global, work on that, Blooming, all of it. They went for two reasons. Number one, they got a skilled, disciplined labor force, as good as any in the world, at a fraction of what they would have to pay in wages if they were here. They went from a high wage to a low wage situation. Number two, because everybody else was doing this, Japanese capitalists and European capitalists, all going into China at the same time. In fact, the Europeans and the Japanese were ahead of the United States. That's why Kissinger and Nixon had to go to China to catch up. Anyway, that was the fastest growing market in the world because everybody was coming there, hiring all these people. There was a limitless amount of rural people coming into the cities of China. So it was what? It was where the wages were lowest and the market was growing the fastest. Well, I've taught in business schools. That's what we teach young entrepreneurs. You want to be wealthy? You want to succeed? Go to where the wages are low and the market is growing. China is the place. They went. And the Chinese said to them, no surprise, you can come here. We welcome you. Come here and hire our people. Come here and sell into our market. But you got to give us something.
Right.
You got to give us access to your technology because you're ahead of us in a lot of areas, which we were then, not so much now, but then a lot. And the last thing that the Chinese said, we can produce it. We can produce as good as you can, and we'll soon be doing it better, and we can do a lot cheaper. But we don't have any way to distribute in the United States. So we want you to work with us to give us access to the market in the United States through distributors. Okay, I can then show you a line in which Amazon, Walmart, Target, they are all creatures of China. I mean, they're separate private enterprises. They were the agent that bought the high-quality, low-priced Chinese commodity into every American city and town. But nobody held a gun to anybody's head. This was a deal that was made. It advantaged the United States. They made a profit they had never imagined before. The last 30 years, the people who own shares, the 10% who own 80% of our shares, made out like bandits because they got their fingers on some of this profit from China. They loved it. They promoted it. They gave it a name, neoliberal globalization. Doesn't matter. They did really well with it. They loved it. But for the mass of Americans, their jobs disappeared. They were, they became greeters at Walmart, handling the Chinese commodities that they could no longer produce. There were winners and losers, in short. And the gap between them is called inequality, economically speaking. And that's why it's gotten worse for the last 30 to 40 years. There's no mystery here. There's no, let me tell you a story because, and I may have told you the story before. If I do, stop me. When I was a graduate student, like getting my PhD in economics at Yale University, it was dominated by males. There were very few women who took economics courses, even fewer who majored in them, and I mean, almost none who went to graduate school. So if there was a young lady in the class near us, we, the boys, the men, noticed it.
Sure.
You noticed that. So I had in my class, in some of my classes, a young lady who appeared there who was a student just like me. Her name, Janet Yellen. See, so you know her name in the way you don't know mine, because she had quite a history afterwards, as she does now. Well, every year or so, she gives a speech, and I kind of follow her because I knew her back then. We had the same teachers, the same books, the same classes, took the same exams. I really know about economics, pretty much what she does because we were learning it together. She gives a speech where she says, correctly, that the inequality is getting worse and worse, and that's a real problem, because if some people are not enjoying the prosperity of our great economy while other people are, that's going to lead to trouble. You don't need to be a genius to figure this out. She figured it out. She says it. And from everything I can tell, she means it. She's sincere about it. She recognizes it as a problem. But she has been presiding over the most powerful economic institutions in our country. The Secretary of the Treasury, the head of the Federal Reserve, you name it. And it keeps getting worse year after year. The people at the top are either unwilling or unable to do anything about a capitalism that is making more and more inequality, which, again, I think most people would agree, fuels the very social tensions and hostilities, the MAGA movement, the reaction to the MAGA movement, the violence that we see, even the events, if we had time, like the war in Ukraine or the activity in Gaza. Capitalism is now a global system. And in some sense, it is a player in those areas where really horrible things are happening. The people of Ukraine, whatever you think about the war, are being decimated. Their country is being literally pulverized. And the same thing we all know in Gaza, and who knows now with the latest story, and perhaps in Lebanon as well. This is a system that is doing really bad things around the world, and there ought to be a debate about capitalism per se, rather than dancing around the edges and never facing that particular part of the story.
You have been watching free public content from Give Them an Argument. To access every single episode of the show, the main show on Monday nights, all of the streams, all of the debate breakdowns, all of the patron-exclusive postgames on Monday nights, all of the patron-exclusive bonus episodes every week, and much, much more, go to patreon.com/Ben Burgis. I cannot resist ending this with, don't be foolish.